See, there will only be 3 on. Yeah.
Aren't the cameras the ones that's on the ceiling?
Right over back here.
So if I stand here,
Out of view.
the post is...
Right. Probably should use this mic over here. See, this one isn't working. There we go. And only 3 of those can be on at once, so.
Yes, yeah.
No, but she would do it every time. So can
Oh, I didn't. Okay, bring that up.
see if you
A few things to mention before we get our speakers going here. Number one, Angie Nemmers has made, looks like a bunch of homemade snacks. I couldn't live up to my commitment of baking the cookies, but I did bring you some cookies, Amanda. Angie has brought quite a few snacks, and then I brought drinks. They're in the cooler in the back. Feel free to get up and walk back and get whatever you need during the meeting. We will try and keep this at 2 hours. I think that 3-hour mark, we start to lose interest, and it gets a little long. So in the interest of our attentiveness, I'd like to keep it at 2 hours. Our next meeting, just so you know, so you don't feel rushed to get into conversation, our next meeting will be no presenters. It'll be strictly dedicated to covering material that we hear tonight, because we're going to hear a lot of impactful material tonight for both our short-term and long-term plans. So the next meeting, maybe the next 2 meetings, will be devoted to discussing what we heard tonight. So if we don't get all of our questions answered in that 2-hour period, don't feel bad. We will get to you. I promise. We will not leave a question unanswered by any member of this committee or anyone in the audience. Okay. I have a few things going on that I don't want to make public, but I've got a few things going on and a scare going on. So I'm going to be. I have to step out for about 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes tonight. I talked to Kim. She's going to be covering my place when I do. So unfortunately, this is probably our most important night of information, and I have to step out for a few minutes. I will be back. As far as the agenda goes, we've got a few speakers here. So I'd like to just, before we discuss the agenda, let's have our speakers stand up and introduce themselves. What I'd like to know, what I'd like you guys to know is who they are, where they're from, what organization they are with, their education level, and years of experience. Because I think that's going to be important. Because throughout this process, we've heard people saying, well, so-and-so says this, and we want to understand where this information is coming from tonight because of its impact. So with that, we'll start with Derek and everybody that's attending tonight as a speaker. If you could just come up and introduce yourself, I'd appreciate that. Yeah, we're back here is fine. So we'll start with you, Derek.
My name is Derek Giles. I'm the South Dakota State geologist. I have 2 degrees in geology, earned in a former life, one in 1975, the other in 1977. And I have 40 years of experience doing geologic and hydrogeologic work. And I've worked for the state of South Dakota 39 years and some months. So most of my experience has been here in our state of South Dakota.
Jay Gilbertson, I'm the manager of the East Dakota Water Development District, which is a regional entity that includes Brandon. I too have a couple of degrees in geology. Spent an early part of my career down at the South Dakota Geological Survey in the long distant past. Have been with the Water Development District since 1994, and we've been involved in a large number of water resource projects, groundwater investigations, those sorts of things up and down the Big Sioux River Basin at that time. And I'm fighting with coals.
My name is Tim Kalman, and I'm a Natural Resources Administrator with the State Geological Survey, same place as Derek. My education is in geology. I told Pat I really didn't want to tell everybody how long I've been working, but I've been working for a little over 30 years in this industry. And probably more importantly, though, one of the reasons I'm here is because starting in 1989 and up through the mid-1990s, I was involved in a couple of different studies looking at the Split Rock Creek Aquifer as a potential water source, and was part of several reports that were written on that, and I was also involved in 5 separate aquifer tests that were done on the Split Rock Creek Aquifer.
Yes, good evening. My name is Martin Jarrett. I'm not actually speaking tonight, but I am the chairman of East Dakota Water Development District, and I too worked for the South Dakota Geological Survey for 14 years as a driller and geologist over those years, and for the past 23 years I've been general manager of Big Sioux Community Water System, one of the regional rural water systems in east and South Dakota. During my tenure there, we've spent a lot of time expanding well fields, serving ethanol plants. We've increased our pumping rates in that time from 400 million to close to 1 billion gallons a year. So I have a lot of experience in expanding well fields, looking for new water supplies and so on and so forth. Thank you.
And then Dick Hammond and his wife have just joined us. They're also going to be in attendance and available for questions. Not necessarily a formal presentation, you're welcome to if you want, but they'll be available, so go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay, I'm Dick Hammond. I'm a geologist. I'm a certified professional geologist, nationally certified. I worked with the South Dakota Geological Survey in the county program for roughly 22 years total. After I left there, I had a water well drilling business for another 14 years, and I sold that to another company, Heidi Electric Irrigation, where I work now, and I've worked there for 4 years. So I've got about 30-some years of experience in geology and groundwater science. That's, I guess.
Also, what I found interesting the other day, you were part of drilling which wells?
I did not drill those wells, but I did the pump test 3 years ago on well number 7, I think you know it as. Yeah. It's the one over on the southeast part of town. We did a pump test on and did water quality analyses on that project.
So he's going to be very, I think, very useful in addressing that well specifically. And then this is his wife, Sarah, who is, let me tell you, geology and hydrogeology runs in the family, because I thought Pat and Dick were husband and wife. It turns out Dick is her brother-in-law, yes. Right?
Yes. You would hate that.
But interestingly enough, Pat is a hydrogeologist. Dick is also in, Sarah is a geologist.
I am, yes. Sarah Chatama. I didn't take Dick's last name. That's the confusion. work together. I am also I'm a geologist. I'm a certified professional geologist with the AI Association of Professional Geologists, and I've worked at the South Dakota Geological Survey for 34 years.
Thank you. And I think that's everyone, right? Okay. Okay. Again, I will be in touch with you guys in the future. I talked to Mark Mayer and Scott Buss today, just thanking them again for their time. I do want you folks to know, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, I can't thank you enough for being here. This is huge for us, and we very much appreciate your time. So, and I'm sure everyone here feels that the same way. So, as far as our agenda goes, we're going to have Derek Isles speak. He's brought his own presentation and equipment, and again, we're appreciative of that. After that, Jay Gilbertson's going to speak, and feel free to Jay, the folks that you brought with you, as well as Derek, whomever has come with you in attendance, feel free to incorporate them into your presentation and ideas. After the two presenters present to us, we're just going to have kind of an open discussion. And if you guys have additional topics you want to talk about, speak up and we'll do it. I was kind of thinking I would like to try and figure out a short-term and a long-term goal for our town. And by long-term, I mean, and keep this in mind when we're listening to their information, by long-term, I mean 30 years. 30 years goes by pretty quick. So in that discussion, we can visit topics like aquifers and wells and MCWC and Lewis and Clark and Sioux Falls water, you know, anything and everything is fair game. So let's get everything on the table so that we can make an educated decision. After that, we're going to discuss our next meeting. It cannot be January 2nd, which is a Tuesday, because we have a council meeting. So if we want to make it that Wednesday, which is January 3rd, and then pick up every second Tuesday after that, we can do that, or we can go to January 9th. And I know there are certain schedules that jive better with some individuals, so please speak up and be heard. If there's a better date for you, we'll stick with it. After that, just any remaining ideas or remarks. I know Kim Kremlicek emailed me. I haven't had a chance to speak. I've had a lot going on, but we haven't had a chance to speak in person or over the phone. But she's got a few ideas that one of them, and we'll talk about this in a minute. But one of them was, you know, a committee for water conservation, which I think is a great idea, because water conservation is something that we're going to have to kind of stay on top of, and it's going to take continuous work. And so a committee for that might be a good idea. We'll let you guys make the decision. So after that, we will assign the next update to be written, if Amanda wants to keep doing it, or if someone else wants to do it. Whatever you decide, and we'll have 2 people reviewing it and stick with that plan from here on out. And then we'll conclude and recap on the ideas that we want to bring to the next council meeting or to any subsequent council meetings. So with that being said, I'll get my big head out of the way of the projector, and Derek, the floor is yours, my friend.
All right, again, my name is Derek Isles. I work for the South Dakota Geological Survey, and what I intend to do tonight is to provide you with a lot of background regarding your water supply, the geology in your area, and potential other water sources that have been considered in the past, and what I think of them currently. I expect full well that you will have questions of me tonight, and I also expect that there will be follow-up questions that come from some of your subsequent meetings, and that's what I'm here for. I work for the people of South Dakota, so I expect to receive questions beyond tonight, and I'm more than willing to address anything that comes my way. So the most important thing is I'm going to provide a little bit of context for hopefully helping you all move forward with the difficult task that you have in front of you. And I have the greatest respect for everybody on this committee, because from my part of the world, I think my job is easy. I think your job is hard because you have to do something with the information that you get from a lot of individuals like me and elsewhere. So I have the utmost respect for this group. So this is where I could potentially put you to sleep early. So I have this slide and two others that follow. And I'm not going to go through every line on here, but I'm going to use them to make a point that the opinions that I express tonight, the conclusions that I make tonight, are not based on things that I just dreamt up last week or last year. It's based on 70 years of incremental research of the geology and the hydrology within a roughly 20-mile radius of Brandon, exclusive of going into Minnesota and Iowa. So there's an awful lot of information. And the earliest one I listed here was from 1947. These are all available from the agency that I work for, the South Dakota Geological Survey, for free online. And if anybody wants to know how to get it, I can point you to the place to go get all this stuff. So, back again, 1947 through 1996, and then more from the South Dakota Geological Survey ending in 2015. And this aquifer is really not for you all to consider, but this report debunks the boundaries that have been presented in earlier reports of that aquifer that would have put it within your reach logistically. But it doesn't exist as the old report says. There's other relevant sources of information that we did not publish. So somebody else published it. Beginning back in 1958, there's two critical reports that first identified what we now know as the Split Rock Creek Formation and some of the sands that are involved with it that you actually have production wells into now. Coming back from 1958, the old Pathfinder nuclear steam plant that was just west of town. And then 1969, 1981, and you start to see the U.S. Geological Survey, my federal counterpart, crop up in some of these. And then the third slide is dominated by U.S. Geological Survey reports from 1982 all the way through 1998. So there's a wealth of information out there that you have to wade through. Each of these reports, regardless of age, has some piece of the puzzle, some truth, and some things that are probably wrong in my estimation now, because subsequent studies have proven earlier studies wrong. And that's just the way science works. If somebody got it right the first time, every time, most of us would have no need to exist. But we learn with everything that we do, and so we adjust and move on from there. So, one other source of information that might be of interest to this group is an online interactive map that the Geological Survey developed a number of years ago. And this is just a snippet of that map. And Brandon sits here, I believe. Yep. So I just took a snippet of this map with these layers turned on. And instead of lithologic, just think drillers. It's a driller's log database of test holes and wells, mostly that the Geological Survey has drilled for purposes of our studies. The Well Completion Reports database is private drillers' logs that are made available by DENR's, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources Water Rights Program. We have a water quality database that is available through this thing. You click on, in this case, the blue dots, which are hiding under some of these other ones as well. Click on the blue dots, you get the water quality information. It's not an exhaustive database, but it represents a lot of the water quality information that we have used over the years in our reports. And then another Water Rights Program database, and this is their observation wells. And South Dakota probably is unrivaled in the country in terms of its observation well network for historic water levels. Some of the wells go back to the 1950s. And the state of South Dakota has religiously, some might say maniacally, measured these water levels year after year, month after month, and so we have tremendous history. And so, relevant to you all here, there are some water level records in the Split Rock Creek Aquifer, in the Big Sioux Aquifer, that would be of relevance to you as you and your consultants move forward with any considerations. And by clicking on any one of these dots, you open up a world of information about each of those dots. So that's how this thing works. even I can use it. It's simple. This slide and the next slide is going to list a whole bunch of aquifer names on the left side. And in this slide, they're just arranged alphabetically. They're not in any special order except that. And the title explains it. These are just names that you will see in reports that have already been published. And you will see 3 representations of the water quality. I use total dissolved solids, which represents all of the dissolved minerals that are in the water, and hardness, which everybody worries about because you don't like the scum on the bathtub or in the washing machine and the sinks. And by the way, does anybody know what the actual definition of hard water is? If you go to any textbook, anything over 50 milligrams per liter is considered hard. So there's hardly a place in South Dakota that I could take you to that doesn't have hard water. There are a couple, but you aren't one of them. Sulfate is another indicator. And so I throw these up here. The average of each of those is listed in bold with the maximum and minimum behind it. And sulfate is important because it adds to your understanding of just how rotten some of these water sources are. For instance, if you're unfamiliar with what sulfate does to the human body, an anecdote from one of my former lives back in the late 70s. I'm a new guy working for the Geological Survey. They sent me up to Redfield, South Dakota. Anybody here from Redfield area? All right. Redfield used to get all of its water from the Dakota Sandstone, a deep regional aquifer there. And the sulfates were high in about the 1,400 milligrams per liter range. And so you transplant myself and a large field crew into this area, and we start consuming that water. And all I can tell you is it was a good thing that the corn was tall in the fields next to where we were drilling, because sulfates will set you free if you aren't used to them. So sulfates is a secondary consideration in terms of the regulatory environment, but it's a first-rate consideration if you are unindoctrinated to the high sulfate water. So I can guarantee you that if you go from the water you have now and you start pumping this much through your pipeline to people, you will have their phone ringing. So 3 representations of the water quality. And now what I want to do is I want to start with the top one on the list and just make a couple of comments about each one of these, because every one of these on this list I don't think is anywhere near an option for you. But you'll see it in reports, and you may have hope, but I hope to put that hope to bed tonight. The Beaver Creek Aquifer. You'll see it in a report that covers a whopping 11 square miles. It has been described with wildly varying depths to the top of the aquifer, which is a red flag in my world today. They were connecting sands and gravels of different depths that really aren't connected laterally. My belief is that the report that appears in grossly overestimates the size of the aquifer. The mapped extent and the water table contours that you'll see in the report, when you know what you're doing, they just absolutely positively don't make sense with what they claim is the source of the recharge and the extent of the valley containing Beaver Creek itself. The aquifer doesn't exist as defined. The Brandon Aquifer. This one is near and dear to your heart. It's underneath us here. It's the glacial sands and gravels up at a higher level than the Big Sioux River Valley itself. Brandon has been looking at this and has been using this aquifer for a long time. So obviously it's a viable aquifer because you're using it. So that's the only one on this list that is a viable aquifer, but it's not much in terms of your future because you want far more water than can be obtained from that one. This thing called the Colton Aquifer. The report has 11 data points in 8 square miles. And in glacial terrain, that's not nearly enough data. You can't make sense of it. So I believe the size is probably overestimated. And this particular aquifer has a whopping 1 for water right permits, 1 permit. And it's the town of Colton that gets water from a sand and gravel right along the creek. The Harrisburg Aquifer. The report says that recharge to this aquifer was to be coming downward through the clayey glacial sediments called glacial till. And I'm sorry, but the report ignored the research that we had done for years that defined that there's really no significant amount of vertical movement through certain portions of the glacial till. So the recharge can't get there the way that the report says it does. And oh, by the way, even though this covers a huge area in Lincoln County in the report, there's no water rights in it. Nobody's using it above and beyond any domestic use. And if you look at the quality, you wouldn't want to use it anyhow. So I also expect that it does not exist as defined in the report. The Howard aquifer. I'm really doubtful that it exists at all as defined in Minnehaha County. It's way up at the northern edge, and it's tiny in size. There's no water quality data, and somebody was trying really hard to make up an aquifer, I think, in Minnehaha County with that name. It does exist elsewhere, but not here, I don't think. Pipestone Creek aquifer. This one had areas that were geographically disconnected that the report lumped together as a single aquifer, which is actually an impossibility. If they're not connected, they can't be the same aquifer. The sand and gravel that makes up that aquifer is extremely thin, therefore it'd be useless to the town of Brandon. And I highly doubt that this aquifer exists as defined in the report. The Upper Vermilion, Missouri aquifer. The report that I get this name from shows that it trends in a northeast-southwest direction up toward Harrisburg and up toward Lenox. But we, a few years ago, did an extensive study of the real aquifer in Turner County, and we essentially halved the aquifer in its size, in its extent. It does not exist, guaranteed, in Lincoln County, as it was defined in the report, in the old reports. The Schindler aquifer, it also covers a pretty large area in the map in Lincoln County, but the report takes sand and gravel units at different discrete depths separated by low permeability material and says, never mind, it's all part of the same aquifer. And they called it the Schindler aquifer. My experience over 40 years tells me that it's highly doubtful that it really exists as it was defined. And there is one permit ever out of this aquifer, and it's a canceled permit, meaning they didn't develop it because they couldn't find the water necessary. It was an irrigation permit. Valley Springs aquifer. The definition of this one lumps permeable units at different depths separated by low permeability glacial till. Thus, its mapped extent in my world is extremely questionable. In the flow direction that the report says that groundwater is having in the aquifer doesn't make sense with the discharge that they say is occurring from the aquifer. Again, I don't believe it exists as defined. So, one more on this one, Wall Lake aquifer. This one exists in both Minnehaha and Lincoln County according to the old reports. I view that the recharge to this aquifer as it's claimed is highly doubtful, that it cannot and does not occur the way that it says. And beyond that, if you want real world something other than just my opinion, the city of Sioux Falls tried hard to develop this aquifer on the southwest side of the city of Sioux Falls by drilling a production well and conducting tests, and they could get neither the quantity nor the quality of water that they wanted. I don't think it's an option for you. This slide actually has aquifers on it that if you didn't worry about other people in the universe, these would all be good for you. And in fact, 2 of them already are. So I'll take the Big Sioux aquifer first. The portion of the Big Sioux aquifer that exists almost exclusively within the valley walls of the Big Sioux River Valley, between Sioux Falls and Brandon, is giving copious amounts of water to the city of Sioux Falls. They've utilized this for a long time. The problem for you is that they have spoken for the water in large part. Yes, there were some temporary irrigation permits that were granted very recently out of that portion of the aquifer, but the key word is temporary. They have a 6-month limit on it because Sioux Falls has future use permits in that section of the aquifer. Should they decide to exercise those future use permits, irrigators get shut off, and you, as an applicant for a water right in that section of the aquifer, would be down the pecking order. So it's not much of a choice for you either. The part of the Big Sioux Aquifer that exists basically from Falls Park down through the Brandon area and then down south to the Iowa border is smaller than the aquifer north of Sioux Falls. It's got the same name, Big Sioux Aquifer, but in extent and thickness and water yielding characteristics, they are night and day. But your part, the nearest part of the Big Sioux Aquifer, commonly has less saturated thickness than the part that Sioux Falls Aquifer uses north of town. It does have, though, a couple of spots where there is a great thickness of sand and gravel. I drilled one of them in 1980. Thank you. Brings back memories. But that is an extremely rare thing. There's only 2 places where I know of, 2 areas where I know of where you have thick sand and gravel. The rest of it has extremely thin saturated thickness, thin saturated sand and gravel. And by thin, I mean in the 0 to maybe 20-foot range. The thick part of the aquifer does not exist over a large area. Therefore, it has limited potential. In that part of the aquifer between Falls Park and the Iowa border, my count, looking at a website that you all can access to that is put out by the Water Rights Program, where you can look at everybody's water right anywhere in the state in any aquifer, I counted 28 water rights already exist in this stretch of the Big Sioux Aquifer. The good news is you got 6 of them. Brandon already has water right permits in that part of the aquifer. 2 of them are future use. So you have a claim to water that you may or may not ever utilize, but you have claim to it. As you go south into Iowa, which isn't too far away logistically for pipelines and that sort of thing, in the Big Sioux Aquifer, what about that? Well, I'm quoting from one of these old reports that I bored you with early on, and it says, and this was a computer modeling report, these simulation results, meaning the simulated behavior of the aquifer, these simulation results indicate that the Big Sioux Aquifer probably is unable to support the present maximum permitted pumping rates during extended dry periods. That's nothing to bank your city's future on, in my estimation. So I'm really not helping you yet, am I? Okay, let's move on to the Skunk Creek Aquifer. In terms of being close enough to build a pipeline to, perhaps, that part works. But you got this thing between you and it called Sioux Falls that you'd somehow have to get a pipeline through, under, or over. And the real kicker is that all of the water use in that southern section of the Skunk Creek Aquifer is already tied up, either in actual use or future use permits by the city of Sioux Falls. They already got their piece of the pie. So it would be very difficult for you to get in there and do anything besides. It's on the other side of Sioux Falls. Logistically, that makes it kind of tough. So now we're down to 2 bedrock units, non-glacial sands and gravels. That's all we got left here to look at. Again, within that roughly 20-mile distance from us here. I'll speak more about these in some subsequent slides. They actually get a little more exciting than just numbers. But we'll look at these for the water quality. The one report linked, or talked about the Dakota sandstone together in these 2 counties. And so this average total dissolved solids listed in the report is including Union County as well. I'll show you a slide that will show you some very different water quality than that. And then the Split Rock Creek Aquifer, you're already utilizing it. The report that I took this from, and John, is that close to the total dissolved solids you're getting now? Okay, so the report got that sort of kind of right then. So this is what you're getting out of the Split Rock Creek Aquifer now, more or less. So, considering, if you'll let me go back, that the Brandon Aquifer underneath us here is this, more or less, about 440, 450 total dissolved solids, and that the Split Rock Creek Formation that you're currently using has 900-ish total dissolved solids. You want to look for something better for the future if you can. You don't want to spend more on water treatment, you want to spend less, I would guess. So, this is a map showing the white area of the map, and I don't expect you to read any of the numbers on the map. The white area on the map is the area in Lincoln County where the Dakota Sandstone or Dakota Formation exists. This map is out of one of our published reports. The recharge, the water movement, according to the water levels that we have for this aquifer, it's highest right along this northern boundary, and the water moves in a southerly direction. So basically from north to south. That means the recharge is up here at the north side. Well, remember the average from the other report said it's 1,800 milligrams per liter average total dissolved solids. Work that I did back in the 1980s looked at this area right in here. And if you're within a mile and a half, I forgot the word miles, within a mile and a half of this northern edge, the water quality is kind of not so good. 1,691 total dissolved solids with the analyses I had then. Hardness is nothing that you would aspire to, and sulfate is kind of getting up there. That's right along this edge where the recharge is coming in to the aquifer. So the recharge is poor quality based on what we have for data. You get down in here in the Dakota, so more than a mile and a half from this northern edge, and you have the water that the South Lincoln Rural Water System is after.
Derek, you want to point out Sioux Falls, Harrisburg, Canton on there?
Yeah. So this, at the time, Sioux Falls is much more expensive now. At the time, this was the southern edge of Sioux Falls, T, Harrisburg, Lenox, Canton, Beersford down here. And by the way, one of your committee members, Pat, spent part of her life up here doing something that we all knew would fail, but Lenox would not take no for an answer. Pat looked and looked and looked with our drilling equipment and testing and all of that for a part of the Dakota Sandstone that Lenox could access. Even though we told them the water's no good, you're not going to find it there. We did it anyhow. And Pat found that the water's no good and that you can't get enough out of it anyhow. And so they abandoned the idea. But interestingly, Lenox, Worthing, Canton have water right permits already in the Dakota Sandstone here, as do the Lincoln County Rural Water System and the big dog, the South Lincoln Rural Water System. They're all after this body of water that sits largely right in here, that was dubbed a long, long time ago by those that live down there the Sweet Pocket. Because as you move eastward into Iowa, west into Turner County, and by the time you get down to the southern edge of Lincoln County, the water quality is nothing that you would want to go after. There's a very special area, the Dakota Sandstone, that is unlike water in the Dakota Sandstone anywhere else in South Dakota that exists right here. It's not being replenished by good quality recharge. It's being replenished by rotten recharge in terms of quality. So I think that you probably could get some more water here, because this is certainly within striking distance of Brandon, the size of Brandon is now. But at best, you're 6th in the pecking order for municipal water rights at this point in time. And I'll guarantee you that the South Lincoln Road water system would have something to say about someone else trying to come in there at this point, just based on my history with contested case hearings in South Dakota. So, this is not meant to confuse you, it's meant to make a point. This is a very recent report that we published just this year, and it contains data on isotopic content of water. So what in the world does that mean? We looked at things called oxygen 18, and you can't read vertically, at least I can't. The other one is another hydrogen isotope, deuterium. We looked at oxygen 18 and deuterium. Those two things together give people like me an indication of the temperature at which the precipitation formed when it fell to Earth and was then put into the ground as recharge. So it's a climate kind of indicator. And these open circles that have this best fit dashed line or dotted line going through it, those are samples of rainfall that we collected either at Vermilion or one up in Beaver County in 2015 and 2016 to establish what is the isotopic content of our rainfall now. And so if we're getting a lot of recent recharge from yesterday's rainfall and snowmelt, what might it look like in the groundwater? So it's an indicator. Well, if I look at the Dakota sandstone, which is these purple dots, I've got a couple down here, a couple here, and there's some right up in here that are very close to the rainfall. So one interpretation might be we're getting recent recharge. We're getting maybe some decade old or something recharge into the Dakota sandstone. Or it could just mean that the temperature at the time that that precipitation formed and fell, way back when, whenever it fell, just happened to be similar to our temperatures that we have today. That's another interpretation. But we also have something else to go with this, and that is the radiocarbon age. It's not an absolute age, but it gives an indication whether the water is really young, really old, or somewhere in between. These are the radiocarbon ages in thousands of years before present that water dates at from the Dakota sandstone in or very near Lincoln County.
Just yesterday.
Yeah, just yesterday, right. So, my belief, my interpretation is that water in the Dakota sandstone in Lincoln County, in that area where the water quality is extremely good, that is accessed by Canton, Worthing, maybe Lennox, maybe Lincoln County Rural Water System, and for sure the South Lincoln Rural Water System, is a non-renewable resource in its present state. It's getting recharge, but the recharge along that north border is bad in quality. So again, you'd be 6th in line for municipal permits in an area that probably, in the long term, is a non-renewable resource. Come on, I expected a groan when I showed this. The only point of this map, and by the way, Brandon sits right here on this map. This is a map, and I won't belabor the map there. I have a better one that follows that shows what it means. There's a lot of data points that we have. This is a map of the Sioux quartzite surface, the elevation of the Sioux quartzite surface, and that's that pink rock that's quarried south of you in Sioux Falls and Del Rapids and in Spencer, South Dakota. It's that hard pink rock. And This is a contour map that shows hills and valleys on that surface, but you go blind trying to see it here. The point of this is we have a lot of control. We know what the surface looks like, at least in generalities. Here's an easier version to look at. This is the deepest portion of that valley, and it shows great on the computer, and not so good with this. There's a darker green color that's in here as well. That's the next deepest part. So the valley's starting to come up in elevation there, and then it's less deep where this green is, and the surface is less deep yet where this is. So the reason that this is important to you, because this shape in here is what holds your Split Rock Creek aquifer. That's where it exists. It exists in the low spot of that valley on the quartzite surface. Here's another map from 1998. Six? Close. Yesterday. And this is available through one of the many publications that we have through the Geological Survey. But Tim Kalman with the Geological Survey was front and center with some of the aquifer testing that went on when this report was being prepared. And this shape here at that time, and by the way, Brandon sits right in here. Right here, right? Yeah. Yep. Be useful if this had cities on it, but I'm sorry the map doesn't. Inside this line is generally where the Split Rock Creek Formation exists. And I emphasize the word formation because that's not the same as aquifer, because the formation consists of siltstones and shales and other things, but the sand is part of it as well. So your aquifer, the Split Rock Creek aquifer, is inside these boundaries. These dark shaded areas here are where shallow glacial sands and gravels lay directly on, they're touching the Split Rock Creek Formation. There's nothing in between them. And I'll show you a cartoon of that. So this would be a fair cartoon for the area west of Brandon in the Big Sioux River Valley. You've got the sands and gravels of the Big Sioux Aquifer laying directly on a siltstone, which lays directly on a shale, which then is ultimately underlain by the sands that make up the Split Rock Creek Aquifer. But this is a cartoon and it's oversimplified. But this gives you an idea of the layer cake geology out there in the river valley. This is ugly, but this is what you get with screen captures out of old reports. So I'm sorry. This is out of a report on the geology of Minnehaha County. And these black lines with dots on them, and this one in particular that I've highlighted in yellow, they represent where the geologist essentially made a slice in the earth and then looked at the side of what he had cut. So it's like your grandmother's chocolate layer cake. You cut it in half and pull it apart, and you have all that wonderful frosting and cake and frosting and cake. And if it's my grandmother, it's more frosting again. But cross-section is what we make. We slice the earth and we look at it, and so there's a number 120 up here and a number 128 over here. Well, that 120 is here, and the 128 is over here. So here's our slice of the earth that we're looking at. And the sands, I've colored in yellow in the Split Rock Creek Formation. It's not as simple as that earlier cartoon. The sands are sometimes disconnected, and they're at different elevations. So I do it too. I call it the Split Rock Creek Aquifer. But I know full well that it may actually be this. The exact same thing that I criticized in some of those earlier reports of aquifers. But there's not enough drilling close enough together to really discern down to the finest detail as to exactly where each of the sand layers is and how they are or are not connected. So next I'm going to go down here. We're going to look at the slice in the earth here. And this one is significant because, and help me out, Tim, the aquifer test was performed here. Yeah. So your well number 7 is, I think, right under the R in Brandon on this map. So this is a very appropriate cross-section to look at. And again, from number 148 to 153, and again, 148 to 153. So west on this side, east on that side, and there's the sands in the Split Rock Creek. It's a little more coherent, a little more uniform, there's a lot more connected, and that's why there was an awful lot of water that was available from that single well. But still, sands at different layers. So it's not necessarily all connected, because we don't know the permeability of all these intervening layers. Heck, we don't even know the permeability of all the sand layers. We can infer it, guesstimate it, but we don't know exactly.
Can you explain the vertical scale, what that means?
Oh, the vertical exaggeration. So this cross-section was stretched 106 times vertically, because if they didn't, we'd all be sitting here looking at a couple of black lines across here that you couldn't discern anything between. So almost every cross-section in every report has vertical exaggeration. That's a great question, and thank you, because I forgot to mention it, even though I wrote this on there.
And so I don't know if it's part of this question, but the units he's got over there are feet above mean sea level.
Okay.
So in other words, the very bottom of the aquifer will be at about 1,050 feet above sea level.
And again, this report is freely available online, and you can do your own coloring. Sometimes it's therapeutic. But it's just to show you that there is information out there on your particular aquifer. Speaking of your particular aquifer, here's some of that isotope data again, that same diagram, but this time instead of looking at the Dakota sandstone, I want to look at the light green dots that belong to samples that were collected from the Split Rock Creek Formation. And they're all very near this line that was defined by present-day water samples. So again, at least these up here, without any other data, it would be logical to assume it's evidence of recent recharge, because we're very near this line. We're very near what the present-day rainfall looks like. So it might be recent recharge. But again, remember, there's that alternate explanation that it just could have been the temperature way back when the rain fell was similar to what it is in today's times. But then I'll do the fun part, and we'll add the radiocarbon dates. We only have 3. But still, I wouldn't classify any of those 3 dates as yesterday's rainfall. We're looking at old water. So I can stand up here and make these sweeping comments, but people like John are going to go, well, how much of it is new? How much of it is old? And there's not a scientist in the world that can tell you exactly, and if they say they can, they're lying to you. So let me use, I think this is the last one before I get to that yet. If you've got a bucket of water or a container of water, like an aquifer, you've got this container that's got water in it. In your case, it's a Split Rock Creek Formation. If 1% of that water is replaced every year, which is a very small recharge rate, 1% every year, that means that in 100 years, you will have replaced the whole bloody thing. And if you assume that your bucket, your container, your aquifer is having that water fully mixed and distributed, there's no way that you're going to have thousands of year old water still in that aquifer. So an explanation may be, well, it's not getting recharged. Even though this looks like it's recent recharge, it's not, because we still have thousands of year old water. Or maybe Yes, it is kind of sort of indicative of recent recharge, even though it's got this. It's just that the water's not mixing thoroughly in the aquifer, which is also a possibility. Another bit of context I failed to provide is the actual age of the sediments that make up the Split Rock Creek Formation. The Split Rock Creek Aquifer are in the order of 100 million years old. Clearly there's been recharge since the first water was put in that sand. So yes, it's having recharge, but how much? I couldn't tell you for sure. How recent it was, I can't tell you for sure. I can tell you for sure that it's not yesterday's snowfall and rain melt. Rainfall and snow melt. Say that 10 times fast. So, last slide before I put you to sleep totally. Some things that I think you can take away from the data that are out there is there's probably some additional water available from the Big Sioux Aquifer west of town in the Big Sioux River Valley. But the amount that you can withdraw on a sustainable basis year after year after year is unknown. We don't know enough about that yet. You've got future use permits out there. Sioux Falls is, I think, using some of it, or at least has permits. It's a possibility, but it's unknown at this point. But my gut feeling is, considering the amount of water that you want, which is on the order of 5 million gallons a day, am I somewhere close? Is that an accurate number? Or just ballpark? I don't think you're going to get that out of this. You can get some, and sometimes a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit someplace else, and you've got a solution to your problem. But I don't think you can count on this as the solution to the problem. It's not big enough. The study that Tim Kalman participated in, and as I think I understand it, where'd John go? John? The study conducted 3 years ago, a re-pump testing or a retesting of that well number 7, about then, more or less corroborated the data from 1995. So,
is that the pump test that Dick did? Is that what?
Yeah, the 3 years ago was the one that Dick participated in. The one in 1995 is the one that Tim participated in. And the pump test that Tim participated in 1995, I believe, said that you could get 2.88 million gallons a day from well number 7. And it seemed to be sustainable. Because the drawdown was limited to within reason, and when the pumping stopped, the water levels recovered. It's an indicator of recharge. So then also because, how far northeast is the other side?
About 3 miles.
3 miles northeast of well number 7 is another area of thick sand in the Split Rock Creek Aquifer that probably might behave similarly if you put in a high capacity well. And so based on that assumption, if you'll allow me that, you might be able to get 5 million gallons a day out of the Split Rock Creek Aquifer. And it might be sustainable. But our problem is, as I tried to show you a little bit of through that isotope data, is the quantity and quality of the recharge is uncertain. I don't doubt for a second that there is recharge, but there's not a soul that can point directly to where, or the wheres, that it's happening and to what extent. And the big gorilla in the room is this word, the radium. Back in 1995, the radium was known to be present in well number 7. But it was nowhere near what John found when they did the pump test about 3 years ago, which took that radium up to 23-ish picocuries per liter, and your drinking water standard is 5. The way that you handled it in the past, the way that Sioux Falls was going to handle it, was they were going to dilute it with better water. And that's a viable treatment alternative, and it works. It would work for Sioux Falls, I bet, if they were to utilize, if they hadn't sold it to you, if they were to utilize well number 7, because they have so much other water that they use, they can dilute it from other sources. You don't have that luxury. You don't have, I don't believe, enough other water from other sources to dilute it, and that's your problem. So you're going to have to mitigate the radium content. And it's only money. And that's the problem. It's expensive. But that's a decision, that's the hard stuff that you guys have to figure out. And then regardless of, if you would go for this, the initial test data says it seems like it's okay. It seems like we can get 5 million gallons a day. But I can tell you from a lot of experience that there's nothing like the real world usage of an aquifer and then the right kind of monitoring over the long term to make sure that you're not headed into oblivion with that choice of an aquifer. So even though it seems good, even though I am certain there's recharge coming in, someone's going to have to be vigilant on both the quality and the quantity ends. And by the way, the radium, where in the world is that coming from? The obvious answer is it's coming from the Sioux quartzite, that pink hard rock. And you aren't the only place that's got radium in your water that's associated with the Sioux quartzite, or sands that were derived from the Sioux quartzite. It was the Turner McCook rural water system, I believe, over in Hanson County. They had this fantastic sand unit at depth that we had helped identify for them, and it would have given them all kinds of water, and then they tested it, and oh golly, it's got all kinds of radium in it. It was gone. Not a source for them. Just to the north of you, the town of Garrettson. They used to have wells in the quartzite, or they maybe still have wells in the quartzite. That used to be their exclusive water source, but not anymore because of radium in their water. So it's not just you. There's others out there that have radium. So the Sioux quartzite is the source, but in the report from 1995 with the aquifer test data in it from well number 7, it also said maybe the radium is contained in the siltstones in the Split Rock Creek Formation too, and in the shales in the Split Rock Creek Formation too, because those things were also derived from the weathering of the Sioux quartzite and other things that were washed down into that valley. So maybe it's not just a recharge coming in from the Sioux quartzite that's got the radium in it. Maybe it's the aquifer itself. And to my knowledge, nobody's looked at the radium content of those sediments. And even if you knew it, I'm not sure what you'd do with it. I'd like to know. So, finally, Tim and I were co-authors on a report in 1989, Sulfate Geological Survey Open File Report 60 UR, that had some recommendations that are still relevant to Brandon today, just as they were back in 1989. And so I'll back out of the way. That this is actually a quote from the very concluding part of the report. And I'll read it out loud. It says, among other things, benefits of a pipeline should be evaluated and included in the cost comparison of a local water supply. You got to evaluate the benefits obtained from improved water quality. How much money will you save over the long haul by not having to treat it as much? So yes, it may be expensive to go somewhere else for the water, but maybe when you amortize things, it's going to pay dividends in the long run because you don't have to treat it as much. And then this is really as true today as ever. And I tried to highlight some of that by saying who has water rights already in some of the aquifers that may be your friends today, but could be on the other side of the witness table in a contested case hearing if you're going after what they perceive to be their water. And I can tell you without any hesitation that that old phrase that whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting, that's not just a phrase. That's real. Because the only place in my professional life where I have been physically struck by a landowner was right down in Lincoln County. Because they thought that Sioux Falls was trying to steal their water. And all we were doing was just investigating the regional groundwater. But people get upset when you talk about groundwater. So it seems like a very dull topic. It's, I don't want to say cut and dry because water's not dry, but it's, you know, it's a very basic thing. But people get emotional. So your friends today may become your adversaries tomorrow. And so you've got to consider that, whether you want to try and get a piece of somebody else's water supply to help augment your solution for the future. So that's all I've got to say. And maybe it's time for me to sit down and let Jay talk.
Does anybody have any questions for Derek before we let him go and bring Jay up? Or you can hold them and we'll ask them all at the same
Or I'll
time.
put you all to sleep.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Again, Jay Gilbertson with the East Dakota Water Development District. 20 years of wearing bifocals and I still can't see the floor when I walk. When Donna invited me down late last week, we talked and he said, well, no, we'll just let Derek talk and I'll be part of the group discussing and answering questions. And so no one was more surprised than I was when I found out I was going to make some comments. So I'm going to steal Derek's last slide. And first off, I would certainly do a big amen to everything that Mr. Isles told you. He conveniently left out, like, who defined that Wall Lake Aquifer originally as being all-encompassing, all over the place? It just goes to show we learn things. And a lot of it, the things that got started when many of us who were here tonight were first cutting our teeth as geologists and hydrogeologists, 30, 40 years ago. When you've got no information and you have a little bit, you try and sort of expand things. And the problem with it's a good thing and it's a bad thing here in South Dakota is we had the rigs, and so if you drilled a hole and you found something cool, we could pack up and move 100 yards or a mile or whatever and drill another hole, where some of our colleagues around in neighboring states can have that resource. The downside of that is invariably in the glacial system, as you pull up and you move ahead the length of the rig and you drill a new hole and oh crap, everything you saw here is gone and everything over there by the exit is completely different. So the more you know, the more complicated it gets. And one of the points, certainly to take away from Derek's thing on all of these little aquifers, is when they were first defined, and a lot of this was done back in the early 80s, core report, 81, right? And, relatively little data, a lot of extrapolation between spots, just as all of us got started, we started filling in all the blanks. And invariably, everything got smaller and smaller and smaller. Okay, if you think of the Big Sioux River today, it's this thin ribbon of water that runs up the valley, right? And there's a little sand and gravel on either side. And that's the Big Sioux Aquifer that runs past through town. Many of the buried sand and gravels up and down the I-29 corridor, they're glacially derived. They started life the same way, and yet pretty much all of us, when you got down deep, would find a sand here and a sand here 3 miles apart, and we'd connect the dots. And so you'd have these skinny little sands on top and these huge sheet sands underneath. Well, it's skinny little sands. The more you drill, the more you find that out. And so, yeah, a lot of those early projections were overly generous. A good deal of what water rights, our state, our water rights program is counting on right now are, I think, very much false assumptions about just how much water is going to be there. The upside is there really hasn't been that much competition anywhere in South Dakota for these resources, about which we may or may not know as much as we think. And it's only been in the last 5 or 6 years we've gotten to a point on some of them where there are more people asking to take water out than we think there's water available, starting to do a revisit and go from there. And so with some of Derek's cross sections, the Split Rock Creek is mapped as covering a broad area. That map is a composite of 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 different individual pods, which may or may not be connected. And if they aren't, then water in one isn't going to help out anywhere else. It's going to take some time and effort to work. And so things are getting smaller, not bigger. The only thing that's probably staying the same is the Big Sioux surface sands and gravels, because they're right there at the surface. I can see them. Okay? And easier to pick that stuff out. I just want to make a few more comments on some of the things that Derek brought. Just use the slide here. The long-term monitoring activity. Some of that has already been done. You know, a lot of this initial work was done in the 80s and early 90s. The Water Edge program, which Derek alluded to earlier on, took over some of the wells that were installed by survey staff for various reasons, and they've been religiously, what was your term? Fanatically? Anyway, maniacally, not maniacally, anyway. They have been consistently taking water levels, looking at how much water's in the ground. The idea being, well, if it starts to disappear, then we're taking too much out and we've got to tell somebody to stop. Last guy in, first guy out. And again, 20, 30 years ago wasn't available. Now we're looking at this right now. There are 6, I pulled up 6 split rock creek observation wells just in the greater Brandon area earlier today. And there are 3 kind of on the northeast side of town, and the water levels appear to be fairly static. Now, whether that's part of the same block or somewhere else, it's hard to say. There are 4 wells that kind of swing from down south of the rec area up around onto the eastern side of town. All 4 of those show declining water levels over the last 30 years. Now, it's not a significant decline. You know, some of those wells are hundreds of feet deep, and the drops are maybe only a few tens of feet over time. But in an ideal world, it would stay flat. That's kind of what the law says here in South Dakota, is you can't pump more water out of the ground than can be reasonably expected to go back in. And at least a cursory glance, it would appear that for some of the Split Rock Creek wells, ob wells here in the east side of Brandon, that trend is going down. Now, we haven't done any attempted to correct it for climate and those sorts of things, but we did at the district a couple of years back have the U.S. Geological Survey look at some water levels in the Big Sioux River. I don't know if any of you, if it's been of interest to any of you, but the Big Sioux there's been a lot more water in the Big Sioux River recently. And in some of the eastern Dakota, both eastern, North and South Dakota, the rivers are a couple of times, 1 or 2 times higher on average than most other places in the country. We're seeing increased flows. Almost all of that is tied to climate right now. So over a period of time when river flow, which is a reflection of precipitation, i.e. maybe recharge, has been climbing in this area, we've got water levels that are at least dropping a little bit under the current load. Now some of that may be discharge loss, some of that is certainly whoever, water use by those who are currently in there, including the city of Brandon right now. And so that's why you do some of this work. Derek's also alluded to the water quality issues. You've got the radium. In the Big Sioux aquifer, the big bugaboo is nitrates. You guys are close enough to Iowa, you all got to hear about the Des Moines Water Works thing. Nitrates are an issue in the Big Sioux aquifer in many parts of the basin, up and down. There is, courtesy of Ms. Hammond over here, a couple of wells in the neighborhood that are part of another one of these long-term 30-plus year monitoring networks that would suggest at least, below Brandon, the nitrates in the aquifer aren't bad. But it doesn't take, you don't have to go very far north or south, and nitrates are a pretty good size issue in the Big Sioux aquifer itself. There are ways to deal with that through wellhead protection activities, putting restrictions on land use around the well. Nobody can spread fertilizer next to the well because it soaks into the ground and you pump it back out again, kind of thing. Minnehaha County has a fairly extensive groundwater protection ordinance in place. It pretty much covers the Big Sioux, but there are things that can be done at the local level as well. A concern for a greater, if you were a potential concern on expanding use of your Big Sioux wells, the shallow sand and gravel wells, is, under sort of normal load conditions right now, as I said, we don't see a lot of problems with nitrates. We don't necessarily see too many issues, under the current load. If you ramp up production out of the shallow sands and gravels that are all adjacent to the river itself, as we've seen in oh, I don't know, like the Big Sioux Community Water System up north, Mr. Jarrett's system, it's quite possible you will induce flow from the river into the sand and gravel. If you pump it too hard, you're going to pull water out of the river. In some cases, it's a good thing. If you've got a well field that's immediately downstream of a big pipe coming out of a big building on north, what's the road, Kevin?
60th Street North.
60th Street North, no, I think the north-south road. But anyway, there's this wastewater plant, which is your wastewater too. Okay? I mean, it's not them, it's all of us, or everybody. The wastewater plant discharges about 4 miles to the west. And there are no restrictions on nitrates that come out of the plant, which is not uncommon anywhere in South Dakota. There are huge restrictions on ammonia, which would kill everything immediately. And we don't really see big problems, but there are elevated nitrates in the Big Sioux River downstream of the wastewater plant by definition. And so if you have nitrates in a little bit of nitrate in your groundwater, you really pump it hard, you can pull some of that nice clean river water in and maybe lower those nitrate levels. If those nitrates are high, you may actually induce nitrate issues with your work. Another one of these sort of pluses for starting some long-term planning on this sort of thing. From the water rights side, Derek's kind of touched on all of that. We have a hierarchical system, or a first in time, first in right. We are in the west. I don't know how far it is. It's about 5 miles to the Minnesota border. Then you'd be in the eastern side, and nobody would care. But here, if you got there first, it's yours first. And so, as Derek noted, a prior appropriation trumps more recent ones in almost every case. And so it's going to take a little bit of finagling at this point. And I'll wrap up my just ramblings here, trying to think of something because Don let me talk. The best time to have done something obviously was 20 years ago, or 30, as it's suggesting, or 28 right here. That being said, the second best time to get started is right now. Okay, from what I understand, that Mr. Buss had indicated, there might be some short-term possibilities working with Minnehaha Community Water, although it's not a long-term solution because they have prior commitments in some of those resources. But it may provide opportunities to start some of these more detailed investigations. Okay, you've got water rights on the Big Sioux. How many other people are already there? How much is being used? Are there places where there might be some possibilities? Derek alluded to. We think the bulk of the valley is fairly shallow, but there may be a few of these pockets that might provide some long-term water quality. What's that Big Sioux water quality like? I don't know. Do you have nitrate issues or anything like that in those shallow wells? I'm looking around. No? Okay, that's good. But again, if it gets dry, that's the plus side of it being really wet in the Big Sioux River is no matter what comes out of the plant to the west, it's diluted. If the water levels were to drop and we had average to sub-average, there's not nearly as much dilution, and that is the big solution we're always looking for. So anyway, I guess I'm going to wrap with that just to say amen to the stuff that Derek said. It's time to start planning, figure out what you want. It's going to cost resources and time and effort, but you've got to do that to look ahead. Lewis and Clark got started in 1990? 89, 90, and there were discussions about the big regional system long before that. I don't think the pumps got turned on until 2012, right? Yeah. So 20 plus years from start to finish. Yes, ma'am.
So we're 6th, 8th, 10th on the list, so to speak.
Yes.
Rights-wise, water rights-wise. How long before we got the water? I mean, 20 years, 30 years?
In what regard? Well, Derek's reference to the sweet pocket in the Dakota. There are already domestic water use or municipal water use will trump almost everything else. I've got a big factory, I want to use water. You've got a municipal water plant, you want to use water. You kind of get to step ahead of me in the line if push comes to shove. The problem with the sweet pocket is there's already 5 or 6 of those guys who have that extra step forward.
Yeah.
And to extent that they have identified all of the available resource, that's one of the issues we deal with, particularly in the Big Sioux Aquifer here in Minnehaha County. And our understanding, because it's kind of hard with water rights, but basically upstream of the city of Sioux Falls, there is no available water, period. It's either being used or it's been spoken for. And if the stuff that's been spoken for is available, it would only be available so long as whoever has spoken for it doesn't want to use it. And between the city and Minnehaha Community Water, they've got pretty much most of that locked up. And so it's a, you know, it might be a stopgap. Or you find another area, or you find a combination of resources that would meet the long-term needs while, you know, convincing Troy to lay a second pipe, you know, up the right-of-way in the big ditch, and those kinds of things. But it's time to start looking way out in front.
So where's our future water right in the Big Sioux?
Where are your future water rights?
Yeah.
In the Big Sioux?
Don't we have 2 future water rights?
Yes, and we were just looking at a map, and I have to get myself squared away. We're on the ridge, it's kind of like right here. The old one, which is about 800 acre feet, something like that. It's been around since the 70s. Yeah, no, it's to the west of us here. It's in the valley of the Big Sioux proper. That's what I would call it. Okay, it identifies sections 3 and 34. No, 3 and 35. 34 and 3. 34 and 3. Anywhere in those areas is where you have the ability to extract water if it's available. You've got kind of first dibs. There's a more recent water right at actually about twice that capacity, about 101, I want to say about 1,200 acre feet per year, that is on the east side of the ridge that we're sitting on. And it would appear to my casual outfit is really geared more toward the sands and gravels and maybe some of the terrace stuff along the creek, along Split Rock Creek. Now I think water rights, again, we'll argue about whether that's appropriate or not, but at least on paper, that is also considered part of the Big Sioux South unit. It's connected in some regard. So your Big Sioux water rights are both right here, and they have 2.5 square miles, roughly, 2.5 sections of ground where you could pull that water from.
So all the future water rights are in the Big Sioux?
No, I believe there's a Split Rock future use permit as well. I don't have that specific information committed to memory. There's at least one on the list. Yeah, I have it over here as well. And that's great, but, you know, what Derek is pointing out here, and at least maybe some of the long-term monitoring data might suggest, is that was sort of predicated on there being more water than may be available, and it's water that right now may not be as good as we would like it to be. In an ideal world, it would all be fresh water and rainfall and the whole 9 yards, but if it's old and it's deep and it's highly mineralized and it's got radium in it and all the rest of it, to say nothing of the fact that it's not being replaced very quickly, means that it isn't a long-term sustainable solution, although it might serve as a short-term stopgap measure to get you to a point where something bigger can come along. So, and I'm going to, Mr. Hammond.
Ray, you said that these 3 wells down here, the water level was going down in. These 2 up here, it wasn't. Is that maybe a non-connected pocket?
I mean, my understanding, and this, I mean, the general description and the ambiguities about lateral continuity, yeah, I just pull it all up, and it's like, oh, okay, geez, the 4 along the south that are southeast of town were all dropping. The 3 northwest of town are static, and one of them sort of almost coming up a little bit. Yeah, that might be a case where, yeah, there is not a great connection, so we're pulling, and to get my orientation straight, we're pulling water down over here, which is where 7 is, I think. Well, I don't, big suck over here is lowering that water table. And it isn't necessarily, yeah, that withdrawal isn't being reflected. It maybe is too far away and it's just not having an impact, or it might be that, yeah, there's a disconnect there. And that rather than being a single sheet that's connected laterally for miles, these might be little individual fingers that any given one of them will just pump like crazy for a period of time, but once you start to exceed its recharge capacity, then you're mining water. And in South Dakota, mining water is a no-no. You can't do that. It's illegal. Oh, would it be illegal in Split Rock? Doesn't the Dakota, is it below the Dakota?
It's both.
Both. Yes, all right, yeah, you can't do it, you can and you can't. This is inside baseball stuff, but the bottom line is if you're pulling more water out of the ground than that's being recharged, you really shouldn't do that. You know, one, it's, again, technically illegal in South Dakota in certain areas, and two, and more importantly, it's a really stupid, really bad long-term plan. You know, I'm going to take more out of the ground than goes back in and expect that to last forever. That doesn't work that way.
So because, you know, I agree with what Dick said, it's both.
Yeah.
And we don't have an absolute date on the sand here. It can span a great deal of time, and so because of that, I'm sure that the water rights would take the conservative approach and say, you can't mine the water.
Yeah.
I think that most of the aquifer, like say that 7 is in the well over here, well 6, those are probably both pre-green.
Pre-green or?
And thinking through the geology of the Split Rock Creek, I think I could convince the Water Rights Commission that those were both that those wells are both.
Well, Jeannie's going to go along with you because it's a lot less headaches.
Yeah.
Now, Water Rights is probably going to agree, but we're going to tell you, and Derek will certainly, ask Derek in 6 months when he's about to walk out the door and retire, he'll certainly tell you. Again, as a long-term management strategy, that's a really bad idea. You know, you don't want to be pulling more out of the ground than is going in. And so.
Now there are the hydrographs in the Split Rock Creek hydrographs during flood events in the Big Sioux. You know, that has recharged the Big Sioux aquifer, and there are some flips, which the Water Rights Commission considers evidence of recharge. But those are small blips.
Small blips. And short term, it's there. And like I said, at this point, we're looking at when you crack the code of how the survey names its wells, the year it was drilled is usually in there somewhere. Same with water rights. And the bulk of these are, I think there's an 80 and they're 87. So they're 30 to 37-year-old records. That, again, there's some variability, but on the four on the eastern side, that long-term track is downward. And now, yeah, it's taking, 15 feet ahead off of what might be 400 feet ahead in some cases. Isn't very much, but it's going the wrong way.
Just for clarification purposes, and you guys could probably answer this, we have 1, 3, 6, and 7 are our wells we're talking about. Which ones are in which aquifer?
1 is in the Big Sioux. 1, 2, the 3, the 1, 2, 4, and 5. The last 3 we don't follow. Right? Yeah, just number 1.
1 is in the Big Sioux. Okay.
We have 3 other wells, but they've been poorly. They produce very little, so we don't even use them.
Right.
The others are all
in the
Three,
split rock.
7.
3, 6, and 7 are all split rock. Okay. 3, 6, and 7 are your Split Rock Creek, and 1 is Big Sioux.
3 is the small one up where the Dairy Queen, behind the Dairy Queen.
So, we talk a lot about, well, 6 and pump tests and this sort of thing. I'm wondering if Dick could explain briefly, I know you, briefly, what an aquifer test is, why you do that, and did you notice anything remarkable or unremarkable about the Split Rock Creek Aquifer when you ran that test? So, why do you do that in the first place? What does that tell you? And did you notice anything?
Okay, I was hired by LGP engineers who was working with Stockholms to run the pump test. And the pump test purpose is to determine if that well and that aquifer are capable, what they are capable of, both in the short term and the long term. Quantity-wise, and we also took water quality tests so we know what the water quality was at that point. It was a bit of surprise that the radionuclide values were much, much higher than they were from the same well on the test that was done by Vince and others back in the 90s. And so that's a question to me. I'm thinking, I'm not saying that the test that we took was inaccurate, but we only have 2 data points, and there are other data points. I'm sure we've run those on the other wells in the Split Rock Creek that the city owns. Is that taking all that together may give us an idea of answer this question whether that's an anomaly, the test that we took, or if there's and perhaps some idea of what the genesis is of the radionuclides. So the test was to determine what that aquifer would support at that point, as well as that particular well that was purchased from the city of St. Paul's. Water quality was to determine how that would fit in with the general water management scheme of the city, in my opinion. If I were doing that, that's what I would be working towards. See how that particular resource could be best used in conjunction with the resources you already have and the resources that you may be able to, other resources you may be able to develop in the future.
So well 6 is being overpumped, pumped hard.
Yeah, that well 6 is a different well. I have all I have is data that was furnished to me, from the engineers that it had been drilled and pumped pretty hard, at least by just a little bit of test data I was able to see that it was drawing down what I would consider an excessive amount, and that when you overpump well like that, it really shortens its life. So its useful life is a lot shorter. You always expect, you can't hope that a municipal well is going to last in the range of 30 or 40 years. In my experience from doing municipal wells in the past from my company, but I have seen wells for various purposes when they're pumped very hard like that, it will significantly shorten the life of the well. So, in terms of well number 6, then my thought was that you wouldn't want to do another well just like well number 6 and expect that use it the same way and expect it to have better results. I've been told that's the definition of insanity. Do the same thing over and over again and expect different results.
Dick, the pump test you were on was on well 7 south of town, right?
Correct.
So well number 6 is the one that's in Aspen
Yes.
Park.
And that's
Correct.
kind of
That's
switching.
what you did.
No, I did well number 7.
Okay.
He redid it 3 years ago.
Okay.
Correct. And she asked then about well number 6, which is over the main well.
Okay.
Yeah,
So all the
in
pump,
Aspen Park.
right.
Yeah.
So the pump test data is on 7.
Yes, it is.
Correct.
And do we have any pump test data on 6?
Just
That would
enough.
be maybe a John.
We have pump test data on 3 because we did a pump test on 3, I think back in 1989 when we basically looked at the Split Rock Creek Aquifer all the way from Renner to southeast Brandon. And part of what was driving that study was the city of Sioux Falls was wondering, was the Split Rock Creek a viable water source for them? And so we looked at Renner, and we looked at the area around the wastewater treatment plant for the city of Sioux Falls, and ultimately found out that what was really bad for Sioux Falls was that the prime spot of the Split Rock Creek Aquifer went from south of Brandon to east toward Dallas Springs. And so that was something that was further away from them. They were going to have to build a transmission line, but actually it was good for Brandon because it puts it very close to Brandon. That's why well 7 was put where it was at, was because that's in the western part of that sweet spot. The thing about, in looking at that and doing all of that testing, we didn't answer all of the questions, but we also found some things that makes me think that Split Rock Creek is something that should continue to be looked at least from a water quantity standpoint. We have, there are both positive and negative signals that it's giving us. And some of the positive signals are that when we ran these pump tests, in none of them that we ran did we ever find a boundary condition that says it's not getting recharged. We actually found a couple of instances in the tests where it looked like we had a recharge boundary condition, which meant we pumped the well hard enough to induce recharge into the outlet. Where it's coming from, or where it would be coming from, we don't know. We know it's likely probably going to be the quartzite. It's going to be contributing some, and possibly even these siltstones that people have been talking about that overlie the Split Rock Creek. They have some permeability to them. It's possible it might be coming from there. But again, there's no quantification to that. So that's why you keep hearing us say, we can't tell you that you could sustain 5 million gallons a day for a long, long time. And really the missing piece here is to stress the aquifer for years to see what starts happening to water levels. Unfortunately, somebody has to invest in some infrastructure for that to happen. The other thing, though, too, is that, and Derek alluded to this a little bit, is that you don't necessarily put all your eggs in one basket. Or maybe you can get a little bit, out of the Big Sioux, or maybe a little bit out of the Terrace deposit aquifer, or maybe there's some other source out there where you're going to pipe some water in from some distance. And maybe all of those together meet your water supply needs for 30 years from now. I mean, the year, when I think about it, the year 2050 isn't that far off. I would go back and look at my first meeting notes on our studies on the Split Rock Creek Aquifer, and they were from 1988, which is basically 30 years ago. So 30 years will be here before, anybody knows that some of us won't be around then, but
You all will still probably be working for the school.
So in terms of looking at something for that, I think that you look at multiple sources, but I think the Split Rock Creek Aquifer still deserves to be looked at very hard in terms of does it provide the water that you need. Now, the thing that has been discussed a lot here tonight that I haven't thrown into that, again, is the water quality part of it. And, back when we were looking at it, and Sioux Falls was looking at it, having, some high gross alpha radium content wasn't that big of an issue because they were going to mix the heck out of it with Big Sioux water and it was going to go away. You don't have that luxury here now. So that definitely has to be considered and looked at very hard. But Vic alluded to a point that I also want to reinforce, and that's that I don't think we really have a good handle on the radium content of the Split Rock Creek Aquifer and where it's coming from. When we were running the test in 1995 out of the well number 7, we had gross alpha and radium content, so we were above the maximum contaminant limit. At the same time, we went and took a radium sample out of well number 3. At the same time, we were running that test, and it came out below the maximum contaminant level. So 2 production wells out of the Split Rock Creek Aquifer essentially running at the same time, a couple miles apart. One's above it, one's below it. We found that same issue when we were doing the study and we were sampling a lot of the observation wells in the area for radium content. And we would find in a couple of wells that it was high, and then there'd be like 4 or 5 wells that was really low. And we even had a situation where we sampled the same observation well twice, and once the analysis came back above the MCL, and once it came back below the MCL. So it's a tricky thing to try to understand, and I think we need a lot more information out there about radium in the Split Rock Creek aquifer to try to really get a better handle on what its impact is going to be.
So I have a question with regards to that while all of you professionals are here. We just got our radium test back today from well 7. It is not complete. We have a gross alpha number of treated water of 10.2.
Not treated.
The 10? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong one.
He said 7.
7's all wrong.
Yeah, 7's wrong. 6.
The 1 and 6.
Okay, so well 7, untreated, correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, but untreated, the gross alpha, the EPA, or Department of Environmental and Natural Resources, holds us to the standard of 15 picocuries per liter, and it's at 53 for untreated, right? So my question is, that's drastically different from like this water, the pump test that was done a few years ago. I think that Tonka water study showed it at 24 after 33 hours of pumping, or something to that effect.
Yeah.
And now it's double that. When we went into this, we were under the impression that it was a 12. We were going to treat it and blend it so that we're down below the,
12, you're talking about radium.
I'm sorry, I'm combining numbers now. I'm talking about the radium 226 and 228, yeah. So anyway, with the gross alpha, this test just came in today. Is that right, Brandon?
About 4:30 this afternoon.
Yeah, okay. So untreated gross alpha is 53. The radium 228 and 226, we do not have that test yet.
We've got the 228 back.
228,
226 will be back hopefully next week.
Okay. So 228 and 226 are just the 2 different isotopes that we look for. And again, that test is incomplete. So can you guys talk, and maybe if as you talk, please steal my position so that we get your voice on audio and get it recorded, just so we can go back and study this tape, because I know I will, and probably most of us will. But if any of you guys that have presented, if you're going to address questions, I'd invite you to come up here, and that way we can get you on, not to put you on the spot, but that way we can get you recorded, so that, because there's going to be a lot of people in the community that are going to watch this video, I'm sure. So
I got one question, just
Yes.
on the clarification of the order. The first sheet that is coming from the entry point from the plant.
It says entry point.
Entry point is
done like 1
at the
and
plant.
6, yes.
1 and 6 combined leaving the building.
1 and 6.
So
That's
well 3 is just from well 3, untreated. So the first page is the only one that has something through the plant.
Treated, yes.
Correct.
That first page is treated.
the second page, 4.49 of a gross alpha is
Well,
Number 3.
well 3 just by itself, raw, okay? And then page 3, again, the 53, that's untreated from well 7. And radium 228 and 226 that test will be coming to all of us hopefully next week. We've been waiting a while on the state on this. What's that?
7 to 10 days, the rest will be done.
Okay.
But they said don't hold your breath.
They're really holding us over the fire on this one. Okay, all right.
So what was your question?
So my question is, like he was just talking about, sometimes these numbers can really vary. You know, if you look at the timeline of testing that's been done, you know, we as a community, we're not water experts. We don't understand this like you guys. You guys might view this information in a different light. How are we to look at this? What should we think when we see a number of 53, you know, for well 7? For gross alpha.
And that was part of the point I was kind of trying to work my way to, I guess, was that data. It's just like the point that Derek and Jay were making on the narrowing of the aquifers. It's hard to make conclusions on your radionuclides, which are a number of different numbers, on just a couple of data points. And like Tim pointed out, that you get data from a number of monitoring wells as well as a couple of pump wells. The more data you get, the better handle you'll have on how best to manage that particular problem, or whether you can manage it at all from something like well number 7. Another point too is that in some places radionuclides can vary depending on pumping rate. You can be inducing water to come from very deep in the well, for instance, at high pumping rates, and have higher numbers than you would if you were at a slower pumping rate. And you can also change the well. You may abandon the lower part of the well if you determine that most of those problem parameters are coming from one part of the well and another. We have 100 feet of stream there to work with. And I've done things like isolate the bottom part of the well, pump that for a while, take water samples, isolate the top of the well, take a different set of samples from that part after different pumping regimen, pump at different rates. And I've got the same well can come up with a number of different numbers just by how you treat that well.
So these numbers reflect what rate, I guess? I mean, I look at this, you know, is it correct that radium is to be tested every 3 years? Is that right? As long as we're in compliance? Because so you talk about more testing. What kind of a timeline are you? 2 questions. What kind of a timeline are you referring to there? Because I guess I look at it as, well, if we're only going to be tested once every 3 years, I would think that those tests would be pretty accurate from test to test. Like you say, are we going to be pumping deep? Are we going to be pumping shallow? Or are we going to be pumping for 5 hours or for 35 hours? What are we going to be doing, or what was proposed to be done, and what was this test taken at? Was, you know, I guess I look at this, a test is just a couple minutes, right?
Those are records that are all, well, the test is for whatever the sample is that came, that 1 gallon increment of water that's coming out at any certain time. And that could be at a certain point during a pumping cycle.
Oh, I see. Okay.
You know, so all those numbers are important, though.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's when you're working with some of these things that are such minute quantities within the system, and you're trying to manage back and forth minute quantities and back and forth across the MCL. You know, knowing what you're doing and how you're doing it is very important.
Yeah, and I guess the LVG study versus the Tonka water study would definitely show that difference of the study you did with LVG was pumping the well hard and the radium levels were much higher.
Yeah.
The Tonka study, they weren't pumping the well as hard because of being in the winter and those radium levels were lower. I guess the concern I have is how reactive is the treatment system? Because if it's 23 today and we slow down the well and it drops to 10 tomorrow, do we just dose the heck out of it, just like shocking a pool with chlorine? Or what is the ability for the system to monitor, react, and control?
I don't have a great answer for that. If John may, you know, when you have a long turnaround time on getting your samples back, that makes it tougher to
right.
monitor.
Because the last thing I'd want to see
The idea
is
would be to get a number of samples and then across create a kind of a trend and
So where was
I
this
wanna-
sample
I
taken?
want to say something to what Jay just said. It could be as simple as what he said. It could be as simple as what Dick alluded to by, not utilizing a certain level in the screened well. But then at some point in the future, you may go, this well's performance so great. I want to get a little more water out of it. And as soon as you do that, all bets are off. Because you have changed the flow conditions in the aquifer, you have changed how rapidly water outside the well is coming to the well, and you will have changed the depths of the aquifer that are contributing to your granular stream as well. So, you can dial it in, test it, it looks good, but then if you change your pumping scheme, all bets could be on.
But don't we, when we play it, let's say that we do say, okay, this well is performing wonderfully, we're gonna utilize that well more. Don't we then have to report that to the DENR and then they have to test those rates again? Isn't that what we learned last
Only if you're permitted for a certain amount out of that well, is my understanding. And maybe that amount that you permitted for is here, and you've been using it down here. And as long as you ramp it up and you still stay under your permitted level, you're okay.
So back to my question then, that test that produced that number, what were those parameters? Was that a hard pumping test? Was it?
No, I was running about 150 gallons a minute at that point in time.
Okay.
And I ran it for about 10 minutes to 15 minutes.
So
kind of flush out the line a little bit.
Okay.
Tim, when you test pumped well number 795, what was the pumping rate?
So we tested that one at 1,400 gallons per minute. And it came up, we had somewhere in the 40s for a gross salt activity that came out of that well in 1995.
How deep was it, Donovan? Do we know how, like they say?
It's the same depth.
Since the well was drilled, it was the same level.
So, the screen pulls at the same level.
Yes, all I did was pump it at a lower rate than what he did his test pump.
Okay.
Yeah, he pumped at a higher rate than what I did.
So, I guess I think of this as if we're pumping less, that number would be lower. Is that right?
Not necessarily.
No, not necessarily.
Obviously, it worked backwards because if you had
that's
100 gallons a minute and he had a 40.
That's what I'm getting at. It either worked backwards or the data's changing over 2 and 3 years, like you said, can happen. It's something's going on there, right?
Or the quality of the water moving through the aquifer, through your wells, is not uniform.
Yeah. Because like you said, the harder you pump it, probably the more radium you're going to get.
Maybe you induce
possibly.
Yeah.
Maybe you bring it from further away that's clear, or it doesn't have as much, and then it dilutes it a little before it gets there.
All we know is that there's a high variability.
Yeah.
But the relationships there we really don't understand yet. That's why.
So that's what I'm getting at. This is doing this, and we can't control that, right? Nor do we don't know what I should say we don't necessarily know what causes this.
Radium occurs naturally.
Right.
So in an ideal world, if money is no object, the treatment process is designed to handle the worst case scenario, and you go with it.
Mm-hmm.
And if having a great variability in different pumping rates implies that there's probably radionucleons are coming from a certain part of the well that's perhaps more permeable from what he's telling us. And if we can figure out where that is, we could isolate it.
You could isolate it, okay.
Reduce the problem. Probably not eliminate it, but could reduce it towards management.
That's okay, I like pictures.
Well, pictures here, that's what I do.
Perfect, thank you.
And so what we're talking about here, except here's your stream. It's 100 feet long in this with 6, 7, pick, I don't know, whatever. The well, it's a 100-foot long stream. Okay, you've got it's exposed 100 vertical feet of pipe. There's going to be a lot of vertical variability. And I've just done here, we've got 4 chunks. Maybe this is a silty sand. There, a little water will move through it, but not very much. This could be a really coarse sand, highly permeable. the way we do it. Come back in and drill another well, only this time, instead of putting a 100-foot screen in, we know that we really just want this stuff down here. This stuff may look like it's helpful or usable, but it's got some other issues. This is the one that's got good clean water that's being diluted with that giant screen, but it's here. Now, that giant screen may yield 1 million gallons a day. Screened off on unit 4 down here, you might only get 300,000 gallons a day. You don't crank this up to 1 million. Don't turn the knob to 11 and break it off, because unless you know that you can sustain it at that level. Like what we're sort of alluding to here is, you know, we're working with a system where we've been making these sort of very gross assumptions about the aquifer. Well, it's a whole bunch of little layers, all of which are going to behave a little differently. Solutions are going to take a little more poking around.
In thinking of that well, it's just one tool. You know, if you only have, I've often thought that all you have in your toolbox is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail too. You know, you want to have a full set of tools to work with. Think of that as one tool. The Big Sioux aquifer may have a few wells in it of other, perhaps even lower capacity each, but they're cheap and easy to make, and have an entirely different quality set of problems. But working with them together, blend all of your tools together and come up with an overall solution.
What kind of...
You don't really, the way, what I've heard all night here is that we don't really have, we don't have a lot of great tools to work with. It may be that we've got some tools that can be blended together to make an overall solution, at least in the short and medium term.
What kind of a time process are we talking about there? Because this well was to be brought online 3-4 months. It's on hold now. We have all these projects on hold. I mean, is this weeks or is this months to you know, is it a costly thing? I mean, I don't, and I know you don't know specifics, but just kind of generalize.
Well, the testing could be done over a period of, I think we want to put a little bit of thought into how to do the testing, make sure it's going to be, we know what it's telling us when we get done. But usually, you know, if you're going to do isolation tests, you could probably do that within a few weeks at least.
Okay.
You test at a certain pumping rate for during a certain set. I have a tool, an isolation tool, in fact, that I can pump just from within a certain 10-foot wide section. Right. And I've done that many times. And for not exactly this purpose, but very similar to this. And yeah, we would end up needing probably to run 10 or more tests, and each one would take, you know, perhaps a day.
Okay.
And I may get better information from some of the other guys, hydrologists, that how long they ought to run it, how we ought to conduct it. But,
okay.
Is there a geophysical log for that well, Tim?
Not that I'm aware of.
Can any of you speak to, in your professional opinion, at what point do you cut your losses and vacate a well? Wow, speechless. Yes!
And I'm the least qualified to say it, so that's why I get to do it.
Okay.
I mean, it's more on the political side. I would think until such time, I mean, depending on what are your needs? We need certain volume of water.
And you guys have stated that, you know, if you only have this water, you have to work on it. But when we have options available, when do you say that we've got these great ones over here?
Well, I'm saying it's time. I certainly would say it. I think, you know, Derek understands too. It's time to start looking more closely at a range of options.
Right.
Okay. There doesn't appear to be any one of them that is going to be a home run.
Right. True.
That ship sailed.
Right. you keep
losses
trying.
until you've got something to replace it with.
Well,
You need X amount of
we've
gallons
got-
of water, and so, yeah, if it turns out that doing all this stuff, you know, you're gonna have to do some of this to begin with, just to get a feel for what's going on. After a period of time, you're gonna look at this and go, okay, yeah, this doesn't look like it's a really good idea, but miracle of miracles, the Big Sioux, that shallow sands out there, there really may be some worthwhile options out there.
Let's talk a little bit more about the Big Sioux if we can, then we're on. Okay. You brought up the fact that you abandoned some of your Big Sioux wells. That's all I deal with basically is Big Sioux wells, all right? I get a Big Sioux well, 20, 30 foot of saturated thickness, allows me 20 to 40 years. Once it goes, it's $30,000 to move that well 30 feet. I can get another 25 years out of it, use the same instrumentation, move the pump over, do stainless steel screen, I'm done. You've got over 2,000 feet, 2,000 acre feet of Big Sioux available to your future use. What percentage of your Big Sioux allocation are you using now? It looks like you really backed off from your Big Sioux allocation. The question is why? It's cheap, don't have any radium problems. It's you already set up to treat iron, manganese, and sulfate, I assume. What's the issue?
Not sulfate, iron and manganese.
What's the issue? Why have you abandoned the Big Sioux wells? They're smaller capacity, yes. You need more of them. But
I completely agree with you. We had talked about this in the past. I think we're all talking about blending Big Sioux Aquifer with the wells of the Split Rock Creek Aquifer. And I think that's exactly where this is all going. And I think that's very important to realize that the city of Brandon has to do that with the amount of wells, the type of wells that we have. We have limited resources out there that we have to take advantage of. And the ones that are close by, that's what is close by.
So are you saying that so 2, 3, and 4 you said are the vacated ones?
2, 4, and 5.
2, 4, and 5.
We're
Sorry,
using
yes.
1 right
yes.
now.
Yeah,
Right,
1.
and 3 is, right, Split Rock. So 2,
4,
4, and 5, we're just not using because they got used up. And you're saying all we have to do is move them and we get to keep our capacity that we had in them originally?
in my area of the Big Sioux, moving 30 feet, and I'm good for another 20, 25 years.
And we have the water rights for
We
that.
can maintain those water rights?
You already have the water rights. And you have 2,000 acre feet of future use, which is about 1,250 gallons a minute. Right?
Oh, I penciled that out.
It's right in there. I've already worked it out.
We do have water rights for the Big Sioux.
That's right, we have 2 future ones.
Went out in advance and made sure we secured the Big Sioux water rights. So this has been something that Brandon has been planning for years. It's simply to the point where it needs to be implemented, and it's been held back, and that needs to be implemented.
So why is it being held back?
What's kept it held back? Like
Have you done a geologic study there? Do you know what the saturated thickness is?
Yes.
What's the saturated thickness in
It
that area?
varies.
What?
It varies.
Well, from what to what?
From anywhere from 20 to 60 feet.
20 to 60 feet?
Yes.
And what's the lateral extent of that?
In this area of Brandon, near Brandon, in northwest of Brandon.
That's the Big Sioux, right?
Yes, so we're talking Big Sioux.
Right. So
Yeah, right, yeah.
That's what we're talking about, right?
Somewhere between 200 and maybe 500 or 600 gallons a minute.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So again, John, I heard you say you completely agree with what he said. Who is not agreeing?
What?
Maybe money from the city?
Committee held up the project.
Okay,
One
but,
time out.
okay,
No,
hang
no,
on.
no.
Hang on.
No.
That was not proposed to us. Just well 7 was what was proposed to the council.
No, we
If we
tried.
start using that in the next
We
3 months.
tried to dig the well northwest of Brandon to hit the Big Sioux Aquifer. And that's when we ran into all of the rock. We found the honey spot on the geological thing. We drilled and we couldn't get any water.
We drilled 6 test wells.
6 test wells.
2 or 3 years ago throughout the Big Sioux Aquifer. One was 60 feet away from the state test well, which is a big producer. It came up empty. As we went through town, the biggest producer, there used to be a little brown house down here at the end of Main Street. That one can produce 300 plus gallons per minute. At that
Is that the one that was considered well 8 that you were talking about?
Well,
Okay.
8 is Split Rock Creek Aquifer. So
Okay.
right now, the one that's...
So we're not Big Sioux on that one.
There's two aquifers that we gotta realize, we're talking about two different aquifers. The Split Rock Creek is the one that we look for more water out east. A couple of years ago, we also were in the process of investigating more water in the Big Sioux Aquifer. If you recall, the LBP report was dated 2014 and recommended pursuing more water.
So that's when we did the 6 test wells in the Big Sioux
Okay,
Aquifer.
and that
to
was
try.
that was 2 or 3 years ago, right?
That was the report.
Okay, so let me ask this.
Nothing came out of
That
it.
was 2 or 3
We
years
couldn't
ago.
find anything.
None
Just the
six.
In the
brown
past
house
2 or
stuff.
3 years, are you saying we could have found more sites?
I'll give you an example. I serve a dairy up north of Flanders. To put in 2 wells up there, I think I did 28 test holes to find the right amount and the right quality of water.
And how long did that take?
Just two production wells, 300 gallons a piece. All right. As Derek said, in each glacial sediment, it changes so quickly.
Yep.
10, 15 feet. I produced wells for an ethanol plant, about 700,000 gallons a day from 4 wells. And where that is by Grand Lake in Lake County, the aquifer it's not as clean as over in the Big Sioux itself. And there the wells only last in that 10 to 15 year basis. But even there, once I can't clean that screen any longer, and the fines outside the screen are plugged with something I can't remove with acid or anything else. Again, moving that 15 feet, I've got another 10 years.
But how long does? I guess what I'm getting at is that was 2 or 3 years ago. So the past 2 or 3 years, we haven't done any more test wells in the Big Sioux. Is this correct? Or test holes? My question is,
why do we do 6 and you do 28?
I was brought up under a son Ferrari with a geological surveyor whose nickname was just another hole. I need an awful lot of tests to find the sediments. You know, everything. If you look at how those sediments were laid down, if you get an example to see an exposure, you've got some stream fills that are coarse, some stream fills that are very silty, and you're going to have different amounts of production. And this is all essentially within the top 40 feet below land.
so there's 28 holes you drilled.
Yes.
10 years? 2 years?
Oh,
2 months?
How quickly did
Yeah,
it take?
that's what I'm getting at.
2 weeks.
Okay, we haven't
weeks.
done anything for 2 or 3 years. This is what I'm getting at.
Right.
That needs to change.
Yes.
Right?
How much does it cost to dig a hole?
Yeah.
What?
How much does it cost?
We probably all know Jim Lacey.
Yeah. Ask the well drillers.
Him and an auger rig and myself, and we basically did 28 holes in less than 2 weeks.
And
That's what I'm getting at.
And
At
so-
what estimated cost was that?
Yeah, what was the cost?
Dick, what's it cost?
Estimated cost. This
Yes.
is just a down and dirty 2-inch PVC down to the base of the Big Sioux. Pump it. I'm looking for iron. I'm looking for manganese. I'm looking for nitrates. I'm looking for hardness. That's it. Quick down and dirty test. And I will do 28 test holes. And for dairy cattle, I want low manganese, and nitrates aren't quite so much of a problem. I want the softest water. And it took 28 tests to find me 2 wells that have now been in production for 12 years, and they haven't changed in quality.
And what cost did that come at?
It's pretty cheap, probably less than 30,000.
So, and are those
Thank
the same?
you for being here.
Thank you. Are those the same tests that you guys do when you dig a hole? The same. It's the same size pipe, and you're only checking for those things when you dig a hole.
But you're professional. So you're talking drilling a test hole and putting a 2-inch observation.
28 times.
With the auger rigs that we just used to
Right.
use down the survey.
Right.
Yes.
So bottom line is, folks, this is cheap and fast.
Is
And
what
I'm
did
not
we pay
for-
for
I'm-
our 6?
And we haven't stopped this.
What did
in
we
the
pay
last
for our
3 years.
6
We haven't
holes?
done anything to
That's
stop
what I'm
anything.
getting at. I'm glad we're all here tonight because
Right.
this is the kind of thing we need to realize. We need to. I'm not
question.
saying it's anybody's fault. It's
Right.
all of our faults. Well, everybody in this town.
I didn't say
Okay?
anybody's fault.
But
I
no.
just- We paid for 6.
Oh, that I don't know. But I'm just saying I'm glad we're here to make
Oh, yeah.
this change because I think it needs to happen.
John,
I would not take
do you know?
for something that you don't know
Okay.
anything about.
Is that something that you can
True.
find?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
So,
Well, just hearing the comment that the water committee was holding things up, I mean, we've only been here for weeks.
yeah.
But they did stop, they did. I mean, that's what that they have stopped moving forward as a
Correct.
council, if I'm understanding correctly. You tell me if I'm wrong, but they have stopped doing anything. to
All
move-
water
So-
projects.
So the only thing that was on the books to get put in work is well 8, and that's in Split Rock Creek Aquifer. That's it.
And
No,
using
well,
well 7.
we've got a thing, which I was gonna bring up today anyways, since everything has been halted. I know that well 6 needs a $30,000 part, and if it has to come from us to recommend to the city council that they can purchase that piece so that our well 6 doesn't go down, I think we should do that.
We made a recommendation last night. Get voted on.
What? No, okay, you don't understand though. An RFP, RFQ, we need to have a work of study. We can't say we're going to do an RFQ unless we know what we're doing an RFQ on. That's different. That's completely different. Once we have that work of study, heck yeah, we're gonna say you need to put that out for an RFQ, RFP. But until we have what we need, what are we doing? I mean,
And
that's
that'll
the point.
be worked on the next week or two. I think it should be monetary based, just like our other bids. Anything over, what is it, 50,000, we have to go out for bids? Is that what it is? Maybe that's what we use in the water scenario. But that's kind of getting off track. Let's
Yes.
get back on track as far as what we're doing, what could we be doing, and where could we be doing.
And I want to make sure everyone understands what Martin described. Does everybody understand what he was talking about doing?
Digs a hole,
He
puts
digs a
the
hole,
pipe in, and
puts the pipe
tests
in
for
and just sees what
like
he can print water.
a handful of things.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Because it's our understanding, I think, of
That's what they
us
said
that are
ours.
talking, that we should have been doing that for the past 2 years in the Big
Yes.
Sioux Aquifer.
Yes.
That's how I receive this. Is that
That's how I
correct?
understand. Yeah, that's my thought process.
That's my, yeah.
But
The
okay,
common sense
what
tells
kind
me
of a
that.
person do we need to come in and do that kind of work?
That's a good question.
Derek, what kind of person do you need to come in that's qualified to do the kind of work that Martin's talking about?
Good old fashioned city study.
Yeah, a good competent hydrogeologist.
Do you have to be a hydrogeologist, or could a city staff person be able to do it? No, okay, I was just asking.
You need a
Layman.
You need a hydrogeologist.
Hydrogeologist.
Because around here, the geology is so complex,
Sure.
as Derek just explained through all of that.
So that helps you
I was
then
gonna say, our
distinguish
situation
where the
is
next hole
complex,
is.
and I
Yes.
think we need to rely on the
We're
experts.
not
Sure.
like Sioux
Yeah.
Falls, where
No.
you can just
Right.
go drill in the Big Sioux and
Right.
you know what that's gonna be. This is
This is complex.
This is
Yep.
different.
So when we had wells 2, 3, and 4 that got abandoned, what were they producing at? Like, because well number 1 is like 160 gallon a well, right? So I mean, are we talking 10 different wells in this aquifer to equal 1 well in
Yeah.
the other aquifer? Because
Good question.
that's the other consideration.
And they were refurbished, there were 3 wells or 4 wells, and the production didn't go up. Well, number 6 was drilled, produced 2,000 gallons a minute of pretty decent water, so it would be logical back in 1999 to say we're set.
So what was that rate that those old wells would produce?
Very little. It was
70 gallons or less.
70 to 90.
And
So,
like I say, we made an effort to go and refurbish them to see if they could pump more, but that didn't work.
but there could be a sweet spot that we just haven't found out.
Well, these wells are within the parking lot of Aspen Park area.
So something that was really easy
yards
for the
apart.
city.
Close proximity.
Those wells have been investigated, those have some clay veins in them, so there's some issues with that area right there.
And you'd have to go a little further than 100 yards, but I did,
Yeah. And how old were they?
well, they were there pretty old.
1960s, what?
Yeah,
Well, they weren't that old because they used them on a 30-year bank.
When I first got into the business, I tried to refurbish those shallow Big Sioux wells. It's not cost effective. It's cheaper. It just really.
But given the alternative, we had well number 6 producing 2,000 gallons a minute, and we were half the population, and things looked good. So that's to give you an explanation why they were abandoned, and kind of the two things that.
How long has well 6 been online?
Well, since 99? Probably 2008, that's when it was drilled.
So 20 years.
And it's dropped off in production too, that's one of the problems.
That's
It's
one of
not
the
producing
one that's
anymore.
being pumped really hard.
So for people like Martin and Dick and me and Jay and John and Tim and Sarah, we understand that there's apples and oranges floating in this discussion. And one of the fruits is a cheap, quick test hole with an observation well put in it to learn about the geology and the general water quality. The other fruit in this discussion is a whole different ballgame, and that's a production well. It's going to cost a whole lot more to do a production well.
Those are two different things.
Yeah,
Okay, that's,
those are
I needed to
different
understand that.
And I heard both of those kind of
Okay, I thought that way were the
passing in
same.
night and running into each other in this discussion.
But you have to do the observation wells.
First.
In order
To find,
to test
right.
hole, in order to
Right.
figure out
Right.
where you want to put your production.
Did we do that?
We can do that. We've done 6 of them, and one location that is.
So those,
2 or 3 years ago, though.
but no, those
Right.
6 were like the holes he's doing, not the proposed
Right.
wells.
Yes.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
I think
those are apples and apples, right?
Yes.
Yes.
And I think what we're saying is, he's talking about doing 28 holes within a couple of weeks. We haven't done any in a couple of years, none. Maybe we need to start looking.
What about land acquisition?
Well, I
You have
think
to have
what you
land
want to
rights.
think about
Yeah.
is you want to define where your area where you want to start, and you want to methodically plan out, based on what data is already known, where you want to do your test hole procedure. I don't think you don't just want to shotgun anything and everything. I mean, there's a system to figuring out where you want to do your 28 before you go on and you go to your next area and you do.
Right.
And there's 40 years of data
Yeah.
out there already. I mean, our test holes, lithologic logs, there's a lot of information already out there that
Could be synthesized
a consultant
by.
would grab. Yes. I mean, this is all
Because
consultant.
Right, no, I understand it. I guess what I'm getting at is, it sounded like the Big Sioux Aquifer, these theoretical wells in the Big Sioux Aquifer are within reach of us. They would be cost effective.
I think Stockwell is mentioned one near the middle school in Central. Does anybody?
I'm sorry, what was your question?
One near the middle school. One is, there are a couple in the range of the middle school that we could, in the Big Sioux, that
Well, there's
would be
We're
tested.
aware of that, and
Yeah,
we're aware of those wells up in this region, and that was part of that shallower aquifer that we were looking at. And we
Right.
wanted to look at how that.
But we haven't yet, so we could start there.
Yes, we have, yes. We've developed some maps that have identified areas that want to be investigated, and those areas are as well defined as we can at this point.
Where's that data? Where's that information at?
Right here.
And has that been shared with the city council?
Is it what?
Has that been shared with the city council?
This is a 2015 product.
Okay.
It's done by Stockwell and LPG.
I think he mentioned it in our very first meeting when he gave that presentation.
Yeah, we presented all this stuff.
So the city council knows about the proposed plan to look at the Big Sioux
Oh, yeah.
and where and all of that.
When was
Yeah,
that
we went
proposed?
over with everyone.
But when was, not when was it gone over, when was it initially proposed with the city council?
About 2 years ago, or
Okay, that's what I'm getting at.
year and a
If
half.
this is a viable option that we really need to be looking at, this needs to be talked about more than once every 2 or 3 years.
The process was to get well number 7 up and running. We've obviously run into some issues with well number 7 because it's a good producer if we can get the quality where we need it. The next phase has always been to move into the Big Sioux Aquifer.
Right.
It has always been to move into the Big Sioux Aquifer and explore options. That was the next phase. That's what it's always been.
Intent was to explore additional water in the Big Sioux to blend with 7.
But
well 7 has cost us almost $2 million.
We have to blend.
And these test holes cost 30 grand to produce a well that cost, what, a couple $100,000 to produce?
That might be better water.
That's what I'm getting at. That's why it's a good thing we're here. Again,
You're going to have trouble getting back to what he's telling you. No.
The shallow wells will create
Oh.
less.
Shallow aquifer.
So just so I have my timeline, those 6 test holes were done before the idea per se of going with 7.
Correct.
Because that didn't produce, you're going with 7, and now we're going to go back and try again.
Because we were in immediate need for water.
Right.
so he dug 28 holes in 2 weeks, and we dug 6 holes and went and spent $2 million. Is what I'm getting at.
But the need for water, the shallow
We're still not using it though.
We're
in
still
all
not.
fairness.
No, but to dig all of those wells, we would get anywhere from, and Raleigh, I'm going to totally blow this, but probably 100 to 300,000 gallons per hole. And we needed a bigger producer at the time, not knowing all the issues that we were going to run into with putting 7 online. We knew there was some radium. We didn't know there was all the radium that it contains. We didn't, so
I guess
there was,
what I'm saying is maybe we should have dug
Yeah,
more
it's
than 6
right
holes.
there's Tim, right, in the purple shirt?
Yeah.
1995, gross sulfur rating was
We had about 47.
47. And the MCL is
15.
perfect, thank you.
Would you have recommended drilling more than 6 test wells in that scenario?
I don't work for you.
In your professional
But
opinion.
we're trying to get
No, but you
outside
do
opinion.
represent the city of Brandon for East
You're
Dakota
right, I
Water
represent
Development
the city of Brandon on the
Hey.
East Dakota Water Development District. Pleasure to be here, so I'm here tonight.
You work for us.
I do agree with Dick Hammond's assessment is you need a balance. Obviously, develop the Big Sioux to the greatest extent possible so you can blend it
Right.
with that very
With the
expensive
7. Yep.
well water.
Yep.
I don't have any well over 50 foot deep and produce a couple of million gallons a day. And your usage varies between what, 800,000?
700, 1.8
in the summertime?
feet, yeah.
Between the two, you should be getting right into that scenario. You mentioned at the onset of this meeting, you wanted to go out 30 years. I think between the two, you could probably do it, especially if you can twist Scott's arm and get a little water from him. Unfortunately, I signed a contract with him last year, so I'm the perpetrator there. And
That's all right. No,
I'm
that's
selling
we
it to Madison.
invite your.
But yes, I would look at the available land, what I've done in the past, gone and visited with each landowner, paid them $50 to $150 for access to their land to drill the test hole. I'm in and out of there in less than 1 day.
Okay.
in the off-crop season.
In the off-crop season
Sure. All right.
too. You can do it in the wintertime. There's no reason why you can't do something out there then. And, you can do it very quickly. Find out what parameters you want to measure for as far as drinking water standards, but obviously you don't have to go mad. If you find some good areas with the initial test, go back and maybe do a more extensive test.
So you're saying yes, you would have drilled more than 6
way
holes?
more than 6.
That's what I'm.
Okay, but
I'm
so
asking.
these.
Derek.
All right, so just to head off any massacre in the future, in case you go forward with drilling in the Big Sioux Aquifer, be aware, just because Martin had success in his part of the Big Sioux Aquifer, which is different than yours west of town, doesn't mean that you're going to have the same success.
Right.
So don't kill somebody if you don't
No.
get the success. Now the other thing too, he made a very important point, and I heard someone say landowners before, and then I forgot, and then he said it again. Experience has shown us in our work where we had done reconnaissance studies for cities and rural water systems, what the Geological Survey used to do a lot of in the past, where we would saturate an area with drilling, zero in on the best area of the aquifer, similar to what happened for your well number 7. And I hate to keep bringing up that sore point, but you figure out where the best part of the aquifer is and then recommend that for a test well. You will find that sometimes that land where you want to drill that well becomes the most valuable piece of property on the face of the earth. So you need to do what Martin does, is you need to